When was the last time the Democrats had a trifecta in all 50 states? That's what we're going to find out today. We'll do the Republicans in a future video. Today, it's just the Dems. And if you're unfamiliar, a trifecta is when one party controls the governor as well as both chambers in the state legislature. Some of them currently have trifectas, and they've done so for a while. Others, you've got to go back many decades. So at the top, I've got 10 tiers of shading, starting with the current trifectas. Then we're going to go back by decade until we get before the 1950s. And the years that we're going to cover here are when the election took place that ended that trifecta. And putting this together, there is a ton of data here, so it's possible a mistake could slip through. If it does, let me know in the comments. I took the data from both Ballotpedia and Wikipedia. And one other thing to keep in mind is occasionally there's a party switch or a tie in one of the chambers. So a couple of times it might be debatable on if there's actually a trifecta or not. So let's dive in. We'll cover the years and the states, and we're going to start with the states that are currently a Democratic trifecta. These are the blue states you know and love. We'll start on the West Coast. First, we've got Hawaii. Then it's Washington, Oregon, California. Then Colorado and New Mexico. Into the Midwest, it's Illinois. Then on the East Coast, we've got Maine, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and the newest trifecta here for the Dems is Virginia. They just regained that back after the last election, starting for 26. Now let's do the 2020s decade. This is where Dems had a trifecta recently, but not currently. First, very recently in 24, we could put in Michigan. That was the year Dems lost their trifecta. One other state in this year is Minnesota. And this one is tricky because it's extremely close in both the state house and the state senate. So setting aside any ties, to get the last technical trifecta, you're going to have to go back to 24. Then we'll go back 2 more years, and we've got Nevada. Dems had a trifecta here up until 2022. That was when Republican Joe Lombardo was elected. Next, let's go back to the 2010s. In 2016, we've got a pretty blue state here. It's Vermont. In 2014, we're going to plug in a super red state. That is West Virginia. It almost seems impossible to imagine, but that was the last time that Democrats had a trifecta in this state. Next, we'll go back 2 years to 2012 and put in another red state. It's Arkansas. 2 more years back in 2010, it's going to be Iowa, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. Back to the next decade in the 2000s, we've got 2007 and one new state. It's Louisiana. Next, we've got 2006 and it's Montana, but that's going to come with an asterisk. There was a Democrat in office for governor, and the Democrats narrowly controlled the state senate. But in the state house, this is where it gets tricky. It was technically tied, but apparently the tie goes to the governor's party, so that's why this state is technically a trifecta. However, if you're looking for the last time they had an unambiguous trifecta, you're going to have to go back to 1978. So it all depends on how you want to look at it, but we're going to move on and go back to 2004. We've got 2 new states here. It's Oklahoma and Tennessee. Then in 2003, we're going to plug in Mississippi. Back 1 more year in 2002, Democrats had a trifecta in both Alabama and Georgia. Finally, at the turn of the century in 2000, Democrats had a trifecta in Missouri. Then, back in the 1990s, in 99, we've got Kentucky. 5 years earlier, there was another trifecta all the way down in Texas. 1 year before that, we've got Pennsylvania. That's another situation where there was a tie, this time in the state senate. So Dems may have had a technical trifecta in 93. But for the outright trifecta, just like Montana, you're going to go back to 1978. 1 more state in this decade. The year is 1992, and the state is Florida. Back into the 1980s, we've got 86, and this time it's South Carolina. 2 years prior, in Ohio, that was the most recent time Dems had a trifecta. Running low on states, let's go back into the 1970s. In 1976, we've got another state that's known to be super red. This time, it's Utah. Continuing with the red states, we're going to go back 2 more years, and this time, we've got South Dakota. The next decade is the 1960s, and in 1966, we've got 3 more states. It's 3 states that end with A. First is Alaska, then in the Southwest, it's Arizona, then back into the Midwest, it's Indiana. That's it for the 60s. If we go back to the 50s, we don't have any new states, so we're going to have to go back before the 1950s, and in the 1940s, we've got 1 new state. In 1942, the lucky state is Idaho. Back another decade in 1938, we've got Wyoming. A couple of years before that, in 1936, we've got Nebraska. Now, this state is unicameral, only 1 chamber in the state legislature, and the members here are technically nonpartisan. But that wasn't always the case. If you go back before 1937, then apparently it was bicameral and there were party affiliations. So the final year before that happened was 1936, and that was seemingly the last time the Democrats actually had a trifecta in this state. So now we're going to have to go back more than 100 years. The next year we're going to stop at is 1914. You might have a guess on which state is the farthest back, but it's actually not Kansas. That's the state that comes in 1914. Dems actually did pull off a trifecta for 2 years here. That's actually the only time they did it in the entire history of the state. So Kansas was a great guess to be the longest drought, but we've got one state left. That state is staring you right in the face. It's North Dakota. And in the entire 130 plus year history of this state, I couldn't find the Democrats having a trifecta even for 1 second. Now, in all that history, they did get close a few times. In fact, the most recent time it was actually pretty close was in 1992. They had the governor's mansion, they had the state senate, but in the state house, they were only a handful of seats away from a majority, and that trifecta, that could have been a totally different story and changed the course of history if they were able to pull it off. But before that, even though the data gets a little bit weird, doesn't look like the Dems pulled it off at all in this state. So you might have thought Kansas was going to be the big winner, but it's actually North Dakota. And that wraps up the entire map. A lot of pretty red states on here are the lightest colors where you've got to go back decades. But a bunch of other pretty red states have done it in the past 20 or 30 years. We're talking about West Virginia, Arkansas, Louisiana, etc. There's been a clear political realignment in many of these states. Conservative Democrats, liberal Republicans, not really as much of a thing as they used to be. So I would guess a lot of these blue states are going to keep it up for a long time. And in the red states, Dems aren't going to regain a trifecta in those for many, many years. I would say their best drought to end would be in Arizona. It's been a long time there, but they currently have the governor's mansion. And in the state house and senate, it's not an insurmountable majority there for the GOP. If it's a big enough blue wave in the midterms, there could be a new trifecta here. But at the same time, if there's not a blue wave, and if Republicans flip that governor's mansion while holding the state house and senate, they've also regained a trifecta themselves. So it's always fun to see which unlikely states have done it recently and which likely states haven't done it in a while. I'd probably think Vermont has done it more recently than 2016. But with Republican Phil Scott there, that's preventing the Dems from regaining that trifecta. So anyway, that's pretty much it for this video. We'll take a look at the Republicans at some point in the future. So for now, let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of this data? Which do you think are going to go on for a long time? Which trifecta do you think might end next? Let me know what you think down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.